Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts, Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week, it's episode 15 of season 3. We're going to have a talk around Azure API Management, a platform to manage and secure and publish your on premise and cloud APIs. Hey, Alan, how are you this week?
Hey, Sam. I'm not doing too bad. 5 episodes in, left even.
Yeah, five. Yeah, we're on episode
15
15
in,
of this
yeah.
season. It does kind of feel like it should be episode 5. To be fair, the sort of speed at which we're getting through this season is pretty insane, isn't it?
It's just flying by.
It
It just
is.
doesn't
Yeah.
feel like we've done 15 at all.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's because it's part of our week to week, isn't it? Right? It's just it's just sort of second nature now at this point, isn't it? So how's your first week of being an MVP? Anything changed?
Uh, Nothing. Yes, quite a bit's changed. Quite a lot from the MVP side that I can't talk about, but definitely a lot more involvement with Microsoft now. Definitely,
Yeah.
it's opening up and that. And next week is the MVP summit. Unfortunately, I can't make it over there, but maybe next year.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing, like we spoke about last week. It's an amazing achievement, and it just really sort of solidifies your should I call it? Can I call it passion for Microsoft products
Yeah.
and solutions? It sounds a bit, but no, but I think it is just a testament to your contribution to the community. So yeah, it's unbelievable. Um, okay, so yeah, this week is API management. I'm going to sort of lead on this, but Alan does have some good knowledge on API management. You've used it in the past, haven't you, Alan? For at least one project.
Yes, I've done it myself without any learning on the go. I think is the best way to put that. With no prior knowledge of APIs, let alone proper APIs, probably, and get my way through it. Yes, and seeing what value there was from my perspective. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm not going to just dive in because Alan makes a good point there about sort of requisite knowledge of APIs and being a developer. I am gonna sort of lay the groundwork for that, hopefully, so that even if you're not a developer, what we talk about today could hopefully add some value to you in terms of what the solution is and what value it can bring. So I'll try my best.
okay then. So, can you give Sam? Can you give us an overview of Azure API Manager?
Okay, so I wanted to just start with just a APIs 101 for people that maybe don't even know what the acronym stands for. But application programming interfaces um, is a way for different systems to basically communicate with one another. So let's say that application programming interfaces. I completely screwed up the thing to start with. So let's say Alan and I are two separate computer systems, and we wish to communicate with each other. Now, Alan and I might be written in two different languages. We're two separate, entities. And what APIs strive to do is to have a sort of a common communication protocol that we can leverage together. So if Alan speaks English and I speak French, we can use an API to sort of bridge those two languages together. I've used sort of like spoken language there instead of like programming languages, but that as a translation and a sort of contractual layer between us, that's what APIs provide. So what we both do is, as let's say I'm consuming data from Alan's system, Alan will publish an API, and a specification of that API, and then I, as the consumer, then write my application around that specification, and then I know how Alan is going to send data to me, and I can expect it in that format every time. And then there's things like versioning with APIs, which allows Alan to upgrade what he communicates and how he communicates it to me, and I can start to consume those new versions as those updates are made. APIs are used everywhere. They are ubiquitous in computing. They have been around for as long as I've been in technology, and probably arguably one of the most popular API specifications is a REST API. So a REST API is a sort of a dialect of API schemas. So you're effectively it's just the way that we structure the communication between us. And so if Alan is a REST API and I can consume a REST API, then simply we've got a better chance of being able to talk to each other. If we both support REST APIs, and then what is actually communicated over that API can be many different file formats. So you might have heard of things like JSON or XML being shared via APIs. They are sort of translation mechanisms. So you can send data in JSON or XML format, and then I can read it and understand it the other side in a structured way. I'm not going to go into that, but effectively we produce a contract between us via an API, and we send data over it, and then we can communicate and collaborate with each other. APIs aren't just that. It's not just APIs, for web interactions like REST APIs. There are programming interfaces at all different levels of computing. So, like internal system calls inside of operating systems. And there's various different levels and different APIs dependent on the use case for them as well. But API management is really focused on web APIs, mainly REST, and also I'm going to say this more legacy SOAP APIs, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a bit more depth further on. But what's happened is that I'll use the example of larger organizations because that highlights the friction that can occur with management of APIs and why a solution like API management actually exists. Okay, so what we've got various different, let's call them teams inside of our organization. You might have a team that's dedicated to your SaaS product. You might have a team dedicated to your back office and your finance functions. And those technology teams may be building APIs to collaborate across the organization. So what can happen is like a lot of building can be undertaken of APIs, and then you can get into a stage where publishing them, consuming them, documenting them, and ultimately securing them as well can become you could fall behind in any of those areas, or it can become complex to have a sort of an agreed standard or a way to sort of collect those in for simpler consumption. Because you might have Alan building his REST API, and then you might have me building. Maybe I've got a different technology background, and I'm building SOAP APIs because that's what I potentially know. Maybe I'm limited by that the technology that I've got access to as well. So what API management can do is it can effectively put a layer in front of all of those APIs for you. And now, what we'll talk about is a lot is API gateways and brokering API connections. And effectively, what we're saying is something like API management would sit in front of these APIs. When you want to consume those APIs, you would first pass through API management to get to those sort of end API systems. There's some really good functionality in what it could do, and I'll take you through that. But essentially, as you connect through API management, it can do a lot of the translation and other various different features on top of it. Um, and I'll go through some scenarios. I'll go through some scenarios now. So imagine if you've got a bunch of back-end systems that you've built and APIs, and you've got a diverse and sort of complex landscape there. Different languages, different API structures, schemas, even dialects and file formats. Um, orchestrating how you document that and consume that within your organization can be complex. If you need to expose, let's say you need to expose some of those APIs securely to third parties, whether that be in a sort of a private, a B2B scenario, maybe with um, a, um, a sister company or something like that, or maybe a trusted third party supplier or partner that you've got, or maybe you're even wanting to share those APIs with the public potentially. Maybe that's part of your offering and part of your business model. So securely exposing those APIs to third parties can, if done incorrectly, reduce your security posture. So having a layer in front of that is fully managed for you could be advantageous. And I think as well, the time to publish those APIs is ultimately important as well. So when we're talking about internal discovery, well, internal and external discovery really, and consumption, you really want to accelerate that, because it's Alan writes a new API endpoint, and the amount of time it takes somebody to consume that API endpoint is really important, from a business and efficiency standpoint. Some other sort of scenarios you can think about is maybe you've got legacy APIs and legacy assets. Maybe there's not business justification and reasoning for rewriting that. A lot of technical stakeholders may wish to rewrite APIs and translate them into maybe newer protocols. API management can help you to transform those APIs into a different format for consumption. And I think as well, understanding that APIs are now what we classify as multi-channel. APIs are consumed, very similar or same APIs are consumed by different parties in different ways. So you may wish to transform. So let's say you've got an API catalog of 100 API endpoints. You might only want to expose 50 of those to a specific set of people, and to another set of people you might want to expose the other 50%, potentially, or the whole of them, right? So also having a layer in front of it that allows you to build documentation and API, what we call products, and have flexibility in that is really powerful.
Wow, that's loads of information there. So just to kind of briefly recap, hopefully, APIs, probably everyone has actually probably heard of these because they may be using Microsoft Graph to access or to automate some of their processes. And in essence, if some of the listeners are using PowerShell for that sort of kind of stuff, they're calling APIs to do those actions in effect from the modules. So, APIs are in our day-to-day lives, whether we know about it or not.
Yeah, it's probably worth just shouting out, the Graph API, right? Because a lot of people that have had any interaction with 365 or Azure chances are you may have heard or even consumed the Graph API, like you say, even directly or indirectly via, potentially PowerShell or some other CLI that you've been using.
Yeah, or authorizing applications to access those permissions, OAuth requests. That's access to potentially graph permissions and things like that. Yeah. So you got that, and then you're talking about API Manager kind of being at the front of multiple APIs that may be of different languages or different standards, I should say, probably, and able to potentially standardize some of it where needed, and potentially put some protection and help consume or specify which users may not be able to consume which APIs that are part of that deployment. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. Adding that layer in front of them, um, but without, I think, crucially, without having to actually change the APIs. Because it is a layer, in front of it, and that's a massive benefit because the engineering time of reworking a tested and in production API could be vastly expensive. So this is a solution to effectively sit in front of that without any any API changes as well.
Yeah, and I guess you'll probably talk about it later, but if you've got a service that's doing internal, like you said, there's internal services talking to the APIs, and maybe now you want to expose some of it to another group of engineers, people, etc., then potentially it's a way to not have to re-engineer stuff in the back end, but you're moving the changes potentially, or I suppose the changes into something in front potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I suppose just to call out quickly, I did briefly mention it, but that's what we're creating here are API. We've got API gateways being created here, which effectively is the tooling that's allowing us to communicate with these various APIs. API management gives you a management plane, so it gives you a web user interface in order to do the configuration and management of your API management instance or instances. And you also get a level of documentation that can be generated for you. So documentation of APIs is critically important for people that consume those APIs to understand how they work and to reduce friction of adoption. So developer portals can be created to do that documentation.
Nice. Does it integrate with any other services in Azure? Like, is it sort of first party? Is there any first party integrations with it?
Yeah, so there's various different sort of key developer sort of focused um, other developer focused Azure products. Things like Key Vault, for storing certificates and secrets. Azure Monitor is used for logging. Application Insights, which is all in the same family to add metrics and the ability to do end-to-end tracing through it as well. Um, Virtual networks, private endpoints, application gateway. So from that network level, we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later on. Azure Active Directory for that, developer authentication and request authentication as well. So there's what's also great as well is the first party integrations with API um, building API building solutions inside of Azure. Things like Azure Functions, Logic Apps, Web Apps, Service Fabric are tightly integrated with API management. So if you are building, cloud first products and experiences, you're going to have a really good experience integrating with this system because it is, highly connected to those other systems.
That's quite interesting because you're in effect saying that you could front a Logic app,
Correct. Yeah.
have a HTTPS like trigger on it, but not have to expose it or allow it from anywhere in the world sort of to trigger it. You can actually put it through something that can then authenticate and check that actually someone's allowed to as well. But,
Well, I've thought about if you know like workflow based logic apps, they
mm,
consumption ones don't have certain um, certain niceties that the actual app service based ones do. Um, this could add a lot of that functionality to you as a managed product in front of it, if that makes sense, right? So
yeah,
the Logic app doesn't have to worry about its authentication and what's going on downstream. You've effectively got a security aware load balancer in front of it and a proxy, if that makes sense, um, to do all of that in front of it, if you so wish, and to expose it securely.
yeah, cool. Yeah, that's the scenario that I think I used it in, or was about to use it in when I was playing with it.
Yeah.
Was exposing it, an HTTP request for it. So yeah. So how, how easy is it to set up API Manager or to get it set up?
Okay, so what you can do is if you've got a current API, and if you're lucky enough that it has an open API specification, which is a big assumption, and if you can go ahead and provide either a link to or a file of that specification, and it will effectively import the structure of your API um, instantly for you and help you with that documentation. Now that is a big assumption because a lot of legacy APIs won't even have that. So you can effectively build um, manually and mock out and build out your API and its documentation via the management portal. So even if you've got something completely bespoke that is still supported, it's just going to take you a little bit more time to get onboarded with that. But on the flip side is if you are in that scenario, but maybe you've got an API that's got a custom authorization mechanism or some legacy legacy endpoint that you're not 100% sure about it's it, how secure and hardened it is. Putting this in front of it is probably going to be top of your mind anyway. So and it's not, if it's legacy, let's say you've just inherited a system that you've got to then take over, you might not want to make any changes to that API in terms of its business logic, because just it may be you're keeping it alive until it can be rebuilt, or but you want to consume it in a nice way. Something like API management you can put in front of it, and it'll make your life a lot easier. And no, in theory, no code changes as well.
Nice. Yeah, it definitely sounds, when you were saying about if you're trying to keep something alive,
Yeah,
and you've inherited it and you don't, the risks in changing anything that you
yeah.
don't know, changing one thing, breaks something else, yeah.
Yeah, you might want to just get yourself to a known a known safe security posture, right? You've taken on, you don't know anything really about it, stick API management in front of it, and then at least you've got time to decide how you're going to handle that legacy code base. Because a lot of the time it might need to be translated into a completely different language and different things like that, so it can take time. So and this is the configuration of a different product, so in theory it's not as invasive.
Yeah, and I guess it would help with migration if you're thinking about that. If you move to a new system, then the API sort of schema that everyone's used to could stay the same, but you changed the back end to
Yeah.
divert it to the new one, kind of thing,
Yeah,
I
so
guess.
it's a bit of a spoiler, but we're going to talk about transformations. But you are able to translate APIs into different formats, and do that as part of the service. So it could be that you work on some of that structure and that schema as you do this, and then you use that. So anything that consumes that going forward will speak the new schema, but you're still interfacing with that old legacy system. So you can make developer experience downstream a lot nicer for everybody. And then when you come to rewrite that legacy backend system, you can simply implement that schema that you've defined with those downstream users, and then your integration is going to be a lot more simplistic. Getting buy-in from those people to consume your new API is hopefully going to be more simplistic.
We've only been talking. Only been talking for 25 minutes, but I'm hearing loads of benefit to this, even with the small part we've like uncovered on this.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that when you um I know that in the work that we do now, we don't really get involved in with that developer experience, right? But I've got firsthand experience of working with internal legacy microsystem based API driven backend office systems, and some organization can have thousands of APIs, hundreds if not thousands of APIs, and we do see that a little bit, um, and loads of disparate teams. I know organizations that every single team is a different language because they've completely consumed all of the technical stakeholders in their area. So they have to have a PHP team, a .NET team, a Golang team because they just simply can't find enough people. So people build in that way. We haven't really talked about it as well, but people also build cross cloud, cross
Mm.
environment, and this can also do that. It can peer into other environments. It's not particularly cheap, but we'll talk about it. But you can also, a gateway on premise. You can gateway up, external cloud and external provider as well into this. So you can really have one singular management layer as well. I'm just
Cool.
going to quickly talk about products. So what it's really doing is when you've consumed and imported your API, you can then build a product to publish and expose those APIs to people. This is where I was talking about deciding which APIs go into which products and which products get um, exposed and published to which user groups. And effectively, I'm not going to go into too much because we have already been talking for 27 minutes. I want to get through all the rest of the features because it is great. But what after it's published, developers can then subscribe to those products to begin using them. I'll talk about that in a bit more depth later on. I also just wanted to mention as well, it's got a caching function built in. That might not be that important to you because you might have downstream caching. We will talk about front door and CDN fronting as well, but uh, caching can be enabled inside of this as well to help you with reducing load on those back-end systems as well.
Okay, so you mentioned that the API management can help with improving security. Can you dive into that a little bit, into a little bit more depth? Because I know we talked about Azure AD and things like that, but yeah, can you go into a bit more?
Okay, so let's talk about Azure Active Directory, because effectively there's a strong integration with Azure, AAD, and being able to effectively use AAD as your authentication or sorry, your authorization in front of API management. Now, I think we all understand how important Azure Active Directory is and how powerful it is from an authorization perspective and other controls that can be layered on top. Um, so you're really getting the power of not just API management, but you're getting the power of Azure Active Directory sitting tightly integrated to this as well. You know, um, Probably one of the most scariest things as being a developer is selecting and implementing an authorization system. A lot of people have built their own. A lot of people use like open source technology, which a lot of it is perfectly fine. But if those systems ever turn into legacy systems and they are not kept up to date, technical debt builds and they can't be moved on. And you could get to a stage where migration, you could have public CVEs you can't migrate. So one of the good things is with integrating with a system like Azure Active Directory, you are knowing that it's at least backed by a company that makes money from Azure Active Directory, aka Microsoft. So you do give up some level of control with authorization, definitely. Then that is a potential risk. Um, but the massive benefit that you're getting is you're plugging in, you know, thousands and thousands of hundreds of years, if not thousands of years of development that have gone into Azure Active Directory. So that's really good. You can also use Active Directory B2C. So if you've got a B2C sort of public facing API, you've got the ability to do that there. Um, I think is well what is worth understanding is it's not security isn't just on that side, like the consuming side. It's also on the producing side. So when API management is talking to APIs, there are ways to actually do that backend authentication to those backend systems. Can be as simple as certs for both sides for consumption and the public facing side and the private side, but also backing onto OAuth schemes and more bespoke backend authentication mechanisms.
Yeah, 'cause I think you can put your own custom domain on, can't you? And then use certs that way for the
Correct.
authentication of it, so you can at least verify it. Yeah, rather than
Yeah,
just
yeah,
being
and
the API manager dot Microsoft.com or whatever what it is. Yeah.
yeah, and you've got things. I don't want to go too technical, but there's shared there's transport layer certificates, and then there's also communication level certificates as well, for consuming and consuming both sides of those APIs. So that because authorization can be very bespoke, and there's lots of different ways of doing it. I suppose the point I'm trying to make is pretty flexible in terms of authorization. So um, whatever the vast majority of use cases that I can think of are supported. So that's a really
But
positive thing.
so this is able to provide. So you may have an API that doesn't support authentication, or is it a basic level? I say basic, but maybe it's just an API key or something like that is you can't actually prove who the person is or anything like that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah, it might just be some sort of shared secret, like a
yeah,
certificate or a key of some sort. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, and then you can put more advanced checking at that point with semi minimal sort of effort. I suppose it can be complicated, but
Yeah, it's going to be on a use case
yeah, okay,
perspective. I think the other thing to call out is if you do have more modern, if your producers, like your internal APIs, are a lot more modern, maybe your OAuth 2, like converted, um, consumption of those systems is going to be a doddle, basically. So I think where you've got bespoke authorization is where it's going to add complexity, basically.
okay. Is there any other security things it might do, like DDoS or anything like that?
Okay, so yeah, there's DDoS protection built in as well. That is something that you can um, uh, add in to your API management, which is really good. Um, and I suppose the only other one that I just wanted to talk about is is can what they class as policies inside of API management. Um, and I'm just going to give you some examples of that and what they can basically do. So what policies can do is they can set things like IP address limits, rate limiting. Um, they can strip potentially sensitive information. So legacy APIs in their headers might broadcast the technology they're written in. Maybe you've got an internal header that you don't want to be exposed to certain people. Transformations can basically be put in place as like a transformation layer to maybe add functionality there. The way I like to think about it is kind of like conditional access in some way. Like that's how I kind of, it's not the same thing, but it kind of is. You basically build rules of what you want to happen, um, and you build it in inside of API management, and it'll follow those rules and those policies that you've created.
Okay, cool. So can you publish applications for others to consume?
Here's a
So
result from the web.
yeah, exactly. You is that was that Google I just heard?
Yeah. It's on
Love
silent, but it's managed to listen.
it. I love that. So yeah, we've briefly spoken about this. We've got the products, and then from a product, a developer can effectively consume that product with a subscription to that product. Um, in essence, at that point, that developer is going to get the authorization access that they need, maybe an API key, and other different ways of integrating. And you can define the users that have access to that. Um, what you can then do is you can publish, you can effectively publish a developer portal for those developers to log in, to see the documentation that you've created, and to get their access mechanism sorted to your API. You can also self-host that developer portal as well, so that you can customize it like even further, basically as well. I did just want to call out a feature that I didn't even know existed, because what we do is we basically use these technologies, and then we spend some time looking at any new features that have come out, because we all know how quickly new functionality comes out with Microsoft products. And API monetization is supported, which I think is incredible. So you can set up quotas and limits and things like that. And you can actually get paid out with there's a Stripe integration, for instance. There's another payment gateway as well, but I'd never heard of it. But I just called out Stripe integration as well. So if you do want to monetize these APIs, that is also supported as well. I assume that's in more of a B2C. It might be B2B, but like, to a public sort of audience. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's also an interesting use case for sure.
Yeah, so I remember the quotas and things like that, where you can say, "Oh, this type of user has like so much, how many times they can call the API in X over a year or over a week or whatever, sort of thing." But they never had any payment method, as far as I was aware, when I last looked at it. I mean, it was 2 and a bit years ago, so I mean, a lot's changed since then, anyway. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think one thing just to call out on that is a lot of these transformations as well can be used for rate limiting, and you can effectively say, because you might have a legacy system that can't be, maybe it's not got the resources, maybe it's on legacy hardware as well as software. So you can set up rate limiting at various different scopes and levels. And those policies, yeah, you can define it. There's insane customization for that sort of thing.
cool. So is there anything? Did you talk about front door integration with it?
Oh yeah, Azure Front Door. So yeah, there's a, as you would expect, because that's another Microsoft product, a native integration there with Front Door. So if you are, especially if you're publishing a public API, and you do want sort of pop presence around the world and sort of a more distributed caching mechanism as well, Front Door is natively supported there as well. Obviously, Front Door also gives you more advanced, does give you advanced firewall support as well at the edge. So that's something that can be very valuable to developers as well. Um, Traditionally, we've done deployments of web applications that interface through Front Door. But if you did have to manage them a bit, because you can connect your apps directly to Front Door anyway without API management. But if you do have lots of APIs to manage and to restructure, that's when you would then sort of put API Manager in between those two systems. It would make sense to.
Okay, so you kind of talked about on-premise APIs. Is it easy to get them hooked in?
Okay, I'm going to sort of bundle this in with networking as well because it's kind of all the same sort of thing. So if you do have networking from on-premise into Azure, you're already going to be there because it has not certain SKUs, and we'll talk about pricing at the end, but certain SKUs can be attached to a VNet, and then you can get networking in that way, even with private endpoints as well. But also you can there is a system, it's a Docker container, which is where you can run a self-hosted gateway, and you can manage that gateway via the Azure management interface using Arc on-prem.
Okay.
So what you can effectively do, and this is kind of like the stack conversation that we had a few weeks ago, is where you effectively run it on-prem, and then that API gateway is automatically exposed to API management in the Azure portal, fully integrated for you. And that what that allows you to do is it allows you to do that gateway activity on-prem or in those other environments before it even hits Azure. And now, what that then allows you to do is those on-premise or external APIs only need to be able to talk to that gateway, and that gateway then proxies the traffic up into Azure and out that way. So it could be that you might have like let's say you had like 1,000 private APIs in AWS, you might want to put a self-hosted gateway in AWS so that you don't need networking access into Azure for each one of them, effectively. So you can gateway, you know, I'll call it gateway at the edge, if that makes sense, like on premise.
Yeah, you wouldn't want it to go out to Azure and then come back just to do those calls in effect. I guess because you'll be
Yeah,
fronting it
as
in Azure
well.
originally.
Yeah, and that's a good point actually. It also depends where the publishers of data and the consumers of data
Yeah.
are, right? Because in your scenario there, you're thinking about consumers on the AWS side as well, right?
Yeah.
Because your consumers could be internal systems in different locations as well. So
Correct. Yeah.
yeah, that's also important.
Cool. Okay, so if you have large numbers of teams or APIs, how do you effectively collaborate?
Yeah. Okay. So as we've spoken about already, you could have many different teams that are building together, um, and needing to collaborate. So what you can effectively do is you can build workspaces. I think it's a relatively new feature in API management. It's definitely new to me. But effectively, you can build workspaces so different teams can have effectively different RBAC models. But utilizing the same API management um, platform. So they all build independently. They can all publish their products and what they're doing, but you can keep those teams siloed and segregated away from each other, because you might have specific teams that work on you might have need to know in your organization. You might want to keep your separate teams, and they're descope their permissions models. Basically, you wouldn't want to give everyone access to every API potentially, inside your organization.
So,
So that is also supported.
so I guess before workspaces, if you wanted to keep that segregations, in effect, they'd have to have their own API manager, basically,
That's what I would
to
have
do
thought.
that. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you'd be able to see all the products, wouldn't you? You'd
Mm,
be able to do all of that side of things. So I sort of see it as a way to chop up API management
yeah.
into different areas that can be used, and you buy those in packs of 5, basically those workspaces. So
Okay.
which
So
is quite interesting.
I guess when we come on to pricing, it kind of makes sense to when you want some of those features, you might spend a lot, and maybe you don't need the throughput, or there's loads of capacity there that
Yes.
that multiple people could use and still be okay with it. But yeah, in without workspaces, you'd have to, and you want to secure it. Um, secure it, segregate it, you'd have to have different APIs, which cost like X times that, I guess.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that probably leads us quite nicely to pricing, because you might want to chop it up, because API management is, yeah, let's talk about the pricing. So there's quite a few SKUs. It's quite a few SKUs for API management. The first level is, and the most one that's most different, is a consumption based. So it's a serverless version of API management, which is great because you only pay for what you consume. And I mean, you could get to a tipping point where that's not actually a good deal for you, but especially when you're starting out, that could be a way. Um, I would say for me, the standout sort of drawbacks compared to the other tiers is you're on shared infrastructure. Isolation is technically shared, not private. There are some usage limits as well. But there's things like you can't have a developer portal. You can't have multiple customized domain names. There's no Azure Active Directory integration. There's no VNet support, obviously, because it's serverless, like other serverless products that we see in Azure. There's no availability zone support and no multi-region deployment. I think that's also worth mentioning as well, because we haven't really covered it, is multi-region deployments. So in some of the more premium SKUs, you can deploy into multiple regions and have that failover handled for you automatically, and routing of a down region. So because API management is obviously going to be quite a core part, if you've got hundreds of APIs that are being consumed and published and consumed inside your organization, it's going to be part of definitely part of your critical path. So that's quite important. You can't do things like workspaces either with consumption. And then the next set of tiers are effectively the same thing, and these are all monthly paid SKUs at this point. And you go all the way from developer through to basic to standard to premium, and then there's an isolated environment as well. Isolated is still in preview, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. But effectively, the further you go through those, the increased cost and the more features and functionality that you get. So developer is for non-production use. In our money, £40 per month is a developer level for that. You can have an external cache, you can have a developer portal, you can have multiple custom domain names, Azure Active Directory integration, and virtual network support. It is also possible to do a self-hosted gateway. We'll talk about the separate pricing for that as well, because that's definitely worth talking about. And you can do things like workspaces as well. And sort of Microsoft give an estimated sort of throughput that you're going to get from that, and that's 500 requests per second on the developer. But again, they don't really target that at production uses. Let's talk about production SKUs. Currently 3 not in preview. So you've got basic, standard, and premium. Basic is £120 a month. Standard is £557, and then premium is £2,270 per month. So as you can imagine, they ratchet up relatively decently. As you go through, you go from 50 megabytes of cache up to 5 gigabytes worth of cache. So if you are heavily utilizing caching, and that can, caching can really reduce your downstream costs as well. So that is something to think about there. The SLA also increases. So basic gets you with developer, there's no SLA because it's not for production. Um, um, with basic, you get 3 nines and a half of 3 9s and a half of SLA. Same as standard, but then premium gets you 4 nines of it as well. And it allows you to premium also allows you to go to multi region deployment. So you've got to go up to that £2,200 a month level to be able to scale out into different units, different regions. Sorry. Azure Active Directory is not supported in the developer portal at the basic level, which I think is probably quite an important thing to call out. You're looking at that £557 a month middle standard one to get Azure Active Directory integration in the developer portal. So to basically put it behind auth, which is probably. But I suppose the thing with all this pricing that I want to just put into context is, if you're at the scale where you've got this amount of APIs that you have to manage, these numbers, they are expensive, but in order for the human cost of operating and managing these things, you could spend a lot more than any of these prices on just human input to manage these things and also maintenance. So I do need to put that into perspective. Basic is going to get you 1,000 requests per second. Up to standard is going to get you 2,500 requests per second, and then premium is getting you 4,000 requests per second. Now, 4,000 requests per second is a good amount of API usage. Definitely.
Yeah, it was probably worth mentioning as well, Sam, that all of these are, apart from sort of caching levels, are all based on one unit, and some of the SKUs can scale out, so you can increase that load as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're really, you could be amplifying these numbers as well. I do just want to talk about that self-hosted gateway that I talked about. They are, because they are effectively running a lot of this this code in those other this processing in those environments, and you're getting that integration. Self-hosted gateways are £812 per month per gateway deployment. So you really have to think about whether a different solution to get connectivity into Azure might actually be a better way of doing the gateways of those private APIs. So that's something you need to plan in your deployment. It's not going to be, it's going to be on a case by case basis what the best way of architecting that solution is.
Yeah, that looks
sorry,
like it's on top of the standard unit price, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you've also got to put it on a box as well, so you've got to
Yeah.
think about that as well. The only thing to call out on self-hosted gateways is free of charge for the developer level, so you can build, get up and running, validate before you start to incur those types of costs.
Yeah, that is one thing I did like about this, was that the developer does give you quite a bit to get it to understand if it's if it's useful, and get pretty much all your logic and your policies and all your config pretty much done, and then
Yep.
you just go, because if I remember, you can then just go into the back end and go, oh, I want to go to premium, and you just change the tier, click save. It takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes whilst it in effect rebuilds it or moves you to that new SaaS or PaaS service to give you that throughput and etc. To then then give you that consumption, so you can easily move it from developer to premium quite easily.
Exactly. Yeah. Workspaces, what we talked about, different teams being able to collaborate with each other. Currently free of charge up until September the 1st, 2023. Developer tier deployments are free of charge for workspaces. I assume that will continue on past September 1st, 2023. But then you get your first 5 work. So you're only charged on standard, premium, and isolated deployments. And you get your first 5 free. And then if you want more on top of that, you have to buy a pack of 5, in increments of 5, and you're looking at £81 a month per pack of 5. So
Yeah,
to enable that level of collaboration, that isn't actually, but it's effectively just a software UI change, isn't it? At that point, more than anything else.
yeah, it's still good to get 5 though, because there's quite a lot to start with, isn't it? For
Yeah,
included, it's free, but it's technically not. It's included in your current consumption of
But
API Manager.
And this is what I think I want to really put back into perspective is if you've got more than 5 teams in your organization building APIs, then the amount of spend that you're paying on 5 teams, right? you've probably got to think that a team is maybe a minimum of 3 people, right? So like the human cost of those teams, and then you know um, orchestrating between them is not a trivial task. So at small scale, API management might not make sense at all for you, which I totally agree with, right? Um, I built many APIs that have never needed to connect into any other APIs or collaborate in that way. So this just isn't needed, basically. But if you are really looking at that publishing and that collaboration element, which a lot of organizations are, then this is a great solution to that as well. And if you want to offload all of your authorization, then this is a very good way of doing it across multiple different technology stacks.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you, Sam. Is there anything else you just thought of, or anything around API Manage? Because we're hitting 55
Yeah, we are.
minutes to
Yeah,
6. So
I had to really. I had. We have a quick. We have a quick chat about the episode before we start, and I said to Alan, I said that there's so much that I wanted to talk about, and I had to strip out so much because I was like, it'll be like a 3 hour long episode. So it's a bit of a beast, but I really want to do an episode on it because I do really think it's definitely powerful from a developer experience perspective. And really putting it into perspective, because a lot of people may see the cost and be very turned off by that, but it really depends on the challenges that you're facing internally, and I personally believe that API management can really help with some of those challenges, and I've seen those firsthand, which is why I'm sort of passionate about this product, because rolling a similar solution as this internally can eat insane amounts of cost and time and attention, which is probably better spent on actually building your software, if that makes sense.
yeah, and like even from my perspective, not coming from coming from a low code no code development perspective, when I was using it a couple of years ago, yes, it seemed expensive for what we were trying to do, but I see a lot of value in it, and it's also just that onboarding process of getting external consumers to consume it,
Yeah,
giving them the access to the API, giving them access to the documentation, without having to worry about building it or updating it into documents and then releasing it. They can just go there and
yeah.
grab it, and like you said, versioning as well and things like that.
Yeah,
So
we didn't talk about version. I was just going to call that out, because when you create a new version and you need to, distribute that to your users, and that documentation updates, that's just handled for you automatically in some sense, right? So there's so many other features and quick wins and quality of life improvements that I haven't even gone over.
yeah, cool. Okay, well maybe we need to do another episode to catch all those other bits, or
Yeah,
use
I don't know.
uses of it.
Yeah,
But yeah, we've got plenty of time to. I say plenty of time. Maybe not this season, but maybe next season we can look
yeah,
at that.
exactly,
So
definitely. Cool.
okay, so next episode is I am going to talk about Azure Firewall and securing your Azure networks and things like that. So I think it's been out for a couple of years now, and I've seen some stuff being released from Microsoft Secure, I think, if I can remember. But providing a firewall in Azure that is in effect SaaS, you don't have to worry about managing the software or anything like that. I think, I'm not a networker per se. I know a lot about it, but yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely Microsoft have applied a lot of SaaS and PaaS capability to more traditional you know networking and other product areas, right? So it makes sense for them to have their own um, sort of NVA firewall there ready to go, but fully managed for you, which is a positive thing.
yeah. So yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
Cool. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
If you we've got the ability for you to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Disagree with our thoughts, or did we miss something? Please use the form or the link to in the show notes to our site to give us some feedback. You can also give us a voice message in the bottom right corner, and if we get some of those, we might do an episode on reacting to them. So, but yeah,
Great. Thanks very much, Alan. And thanks everyone for listening. And we'll catch you on the next one.
yeah. Thanks everyone. Take care. See you next week.